The alien generals were laughing so hard they nearly choked on their nutrient gels as the live feed flickered across the command center's massive screen. The mighty Echelon Vanguard, the pride of the Empire's military, was trudging through a soggy earth forest armed with plasma rifles, air support drones, and full armor exocets. The humans below them were a scurrying mess, scrambling with what looked like rope, fire, and was that bees? One general wheezed in disbelief and muttered through laughter that he had seen preschool simulations more threatening than this. Another suggested they send half the army back to the fleet. This war was already over. But then the laughter stopped all at once, replaced by a silence so complete that even the oxygen filters seemed to hold their breath. The camera zoomed in on the Echelon Vanguard, the elite soldiers of the galaxy-spanning Trilari Empire, dangling helplessly from treetops upside down like overgrown fruit bats, their weapons missing, their armor covered in mud, and one soldier apparently crying for his mother in 3 different dialects. Inside the command 10 miles away, Captain Mira Vega leaned on the edge of the holographic table with the kind of casual confidence that infuriated alien strategists. Her hair was plastered to her face from rain, her uniform streaked with dirt, but her grin was infuriatingly wide. She watched the same feed the aliens did through a hacked comm relay and clapped her hands once like a schoolteacher satisfied with a science project gone right. Beside her, Lieutenant Dax Carter flipped through a soggy notebook full of scribbled plans that looked less like military strategy and more like the fever dreams of a sleep-deprived art student. "That was the Vanguard, right?" Mira asked innocently, though the smirk tugging at her mouth said she knew exactly who it was. "Sure was," Dax replied, tapping the notebook with his pencil. "Chapter 4, Make the big scary space soldiers look like idiots." Mira chuckled and looked at the comm screen again. The alien generals were in chaos now, antennae twitching, mouths clicking as their voices rose in overlapping layers of outrage and confusion. Someone threw a datapad across the room. Someone else fainted. One general demanded to know how the humans had managed to ambush an elite unit with nothing but trees, ropes, and what appeared to be, was that peanut butter? Back in the forest, the Vanguard was trying to cut itself loose while small bands of human fighters darted through the rain, grabbing alien weapons and equipment before vanishing like ghosts. One soldier tripped over a log and disappeared into a pit covered with leaves, emerging seconds later with 3 raccoons clinging to his helmet. The alien generals shouted louder. Mira finally turned from the screen and addressed her crew. "Well," she said, "I think that got their attention." The human resistance fighters in the tent laughed, a little too loudly, the kind of laughter that comes after weeks of fear and exhaustion. Because no matter how ridiculous it looked, this was the first real win they had gotten since the invasion began. 2 months ago the Trilari Empire had descended on Earth with blinding speed, torching cities, disabling satellites, and smashing military defenses as if swatting flies. Humanity barely had time to breathe before whole continents fell under alien control. Billions lived under occupation now. Entire armies had been annihilated in hours. But the aliens had made one mistake. They left the forests largely untouched, dismissing them as irrelevant terrain in a world of cities and highways. Too messy, too wet, too unpredictable for proper troop movements. That suited Captain Mira Vega just fine. Her fighters had vanished into the wilderness with whatever weapons they could scavenge, and what they lacked in firepower they made up for in sheer stubbornness and a willingness to fight as dirty as necessary. The aliens hated dirty. As the storm outside raged on, Mira studied the forest map glowing on the table. Red dots marked alien patrol routes. Blue dots marked her teams. She had maybe 200 fighters stretched across 50 miles of rain-soaked terrain, and somehow they had just taken down the Empire's best soldiers using ropes, fire pits, and gravity. It should not have worked. It should have been impossible. But the thing about impossible was that nobody told Mira Vega when to quit. Lieutenant Dax leaned over the map, scratching his stubbled chin. "They're going to be mad," he said. "They were already mad," Mira replied. "Now they're embarrassed. That's worse. Embarrassed generals make stupid choices," Dax said thoughtfully. "Stupid choices make opportunities." She nodded. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The Trilari Empire wasn't used to failure. In every world they conquered, resistance had collapsed like wet cardboard after the first overwhelming show of force. Their generals were used to precision and control, to wars that looked like math problems solved with bombs and laser fire. Humanity's chaos was driving them insane. But even as the humans celebrated, Mira knew this wouldn't last. The aliens would adapt. They always adapted. This war was far from over, and the Empire had resources beyond imagination. A scout burst into the tent, dripping rainwater and clutching a cracked helmet under one arm. "Captain," he said, panting. "You need to see this." He dumped the helmet onto the table. The insignia etched into its side made everyone fall silent. It belonged to Commander Exorthak, leader of the Vanguard unit. One of the most feared officers in the entire alien military. Mira stared at it for a long moment, then looked at the scout. "Where's the commander?" The scout swallowed hard. "Still hanging," he said. "Upside down. In a tree." For a second nobody spoke. Then Mira started laughing, loud and sharp, the kind of laugh that spread quickly through the entire tent until everyone was gasping for air. Somewhere far away the alien generals were probably screaming into their comms, demanding explanations, demanding revenge, demanding to know how their flawless empire was getting humiliated by people with rope and peanut butter. Mira wiped rainwater from her face and straightened. "All right," she said. "Let them come. The bigger the army they send, the harder they'll fall. We're just getting started." The storm raged on above the forest, lightning flashing through the canopy like nature itself was laughing along. The humans melted back into the trees, leaving nothing behind but empty ropes swaying in the wind and the echoes of alien pride cracking apart in the rain. The alien command center looked like a nest of angry hornets as the generals argued over one another, their voices rising higher with every report streaming in from the battered forest squads. On one side of the room, a translator drone projected real-time footage of soldiers being cut out of nets by rescue crews, many of them dripping with mud and stripped of their weapons. A medic was trying to explain why 3 Vanguard troopers were in medical stasis after being chased off a cliff by what appeared to be flaming pigs. On the other side, a logistics officer was weeping softly over the destruction of several million credits worth of reconnaissance drones brought down by slingshots and old-fashioned tripwires. The alien generals were not used to losing, and certainly not used to losing in ways that made them look like clowns. General Krozik slammed his claws on the table so hard that several officers jumped. He demanded an immediate counteroffensive to crush the humans before the humiliation spread any further through the Empire. General Vorth disagreed and insisted the Empire should investigate how the humans were disrupting their units. General Threx wanted to deploy planetary annihilation weapons and end the problem once and for all. The room devolved into shouting again as the holographic map flickered with angry red blips showing destroyed squads. For the first time since the invasion began, the unstoppable Trilari war machine looked confused. Far away in the dripping heart of the forest, Captain Mira Vega leaned against a tree with her arms crossed as she listened to a battered radio crackle with intercepted alien communications. Lieutenant Dax Carter knelt beside a fire, sketching new attack plans in the dirt with a stick as though this was a summer camp instead of a war zone. He looked up when Mira smirked at something over the radio and asked what the aliens were saying. She told him the generals were arguing about whether humans used dark magic to control the weather. Dax laughed so hard he nearly fell into the fire. The resistance fighters around them were in high spirits after their recent success. They had started the week with nothing but scavenged weapons and desperation. Now they had captured alien rifles, armor plates, and enough power cells to run a small city. One fighter showed off a salvaged alien drone now strapped with grenades like some kind of explosive pet bird. Another had taken a plasma rifle and replaced the power module with a car battery because, as he explained, why not? Mira studied the crude map drawn in the dirt. It showed the next few miles of forest, including a narrow ravine where alien patrols had been spotted moving supplies. She told Dax they would hit the ravine tonight. He frowned at the map and pointed out that the aliens were likely to send heavier forces after what happened to the Vanguard. Mira replied that heavier forces just meant bigger targets. As the humans prepared for the next ambush, rain continued to fall in steady sheets, turning the ground to mud and muffling footsteps under the dense canopy. Scouts reported the aliens moving in tighter formations now, with armored vehicles cutting paths through the trees. The Empire was adapting, but so were the humans. Lieutenant Dax handed out instructions with the calm of someone explaining a board game rather than planning guerrilla warfare. He had fighters stringing cables across trails, burying explosives in the mud, and setting up decoy camps to lure alien patrols into traps. The first supply convoy entered the ravine at dusk, engines growling under the rain. Armored troopers marched on either side, scanning the trees with infrared scopes. Above them, aerial drones hummed in cautious circles. The alien commander riding in the lead transport was confident enough to be annoyed rather than afraid. His orders were to deliver supplies and then sweep the forest clean of human resistance before sunrise. His troops were equipped with insect repellents, fire suppressors, and motion sensors to prevent any more humiliating surprises. Halfway through the ravine, the convoy halted. Something moved in the trees above, a flicker of motion in the rain. Troopers raised their rifles, scanning branches heavy with water. Then came the sound. Not gunfire, not explosives, but a long eerie creaking like the forest itself was groaning. A heartbeat later, a massive log swung out of the darkness on a chain of vines, smashing into the lead transport and flipping it onto its side. Troopers scattered as more logs swung down from both sides like giant battering rams, slamming into vehicles and drones. The humans attacked out of the rain with everything from rifles to slingshots. Plasma bolts lit up the forest in flashes of green and blue as alien soldiers fired wildly into the trees. One vehicle tried to turn around and promptly drove into a pit covered with branches, vanishing with a splash and a shower of mud. The convoy commander screamed orders until a swarm of hornets, shaken loose from a nest by falling debris, sent him running in circles covered in insects. By the time the fight ended, the ravine was littered with wrecked vehicles, smashed drones, and dazed soldiers tied to trees with their own supply cables. The humans vanished as quickly as they had appeared, dragging away crates of supplies and leaving behind nothing but chaos and confusion. Back at the alien command center, the generals stared at the latest reports in stunned silence. Footage from drone cameras showed the convoy's destruction in embarrassing detail, including one soldier knocked unconscious by a falling raccoon. General Krozik shouted that the humans were using primitive traps unworthy of a galactic empire. General Vorth snapped that primitive traps seemed to be working better than the Empire's advanced strategies. The argument grew louder until an aide cautiously suggested requesting reinforcements from the orbiting fleet. Meanwhile in the forest, Mera watched her fighters distribute captured supplies to nearby villages. Civilians emerged from hiding to collect food and medicine, their fears slowly giving way to hope. For the first time since the invasion began, people were laughing again. One old man tied a captured alien helmet to a stick and planted it like a scarecrow at the edge of the village, drawing cheers from the children. Dax dropped onto a log beside Mira, soaked with rain but grinning. He told her the aliens would have to come down here themselves if they wanted to win, that sooner or later the generals would get tired of losing convoys and send their best troops straight into the forests. Mira nodded slowly, eyes on the storm rolling over the treetops. That was exactly what she wanted. The more soldiers the Empire sent into the wilderness, the deeper they would sink into the kind of war they had never trained for. High above the planet, the Trilari fleet floated among the clouds like metal gods, its warships bristling with weapons capable of leveling continents. Down below, in the wet dripping dark of the forests, barefoot fighters with homemade explosives and stolen rifles were making those gods look very small. And with each humiliating defeat, the Empire's anger grew hotter, its pride thinner, and its mistakes bigger. The humans were winning not through strength or numbers, but by dragging the most advanced army in the galaxy into a place where technology meant nothing and chaos ruled everything. And Captain Mira Vega planned to keep it that way until the Empire cracked wide open. Rain pounded the alien command center like drumfire as the generals gathered again, their tempers fraying to the point of near violence. Reports from the forest continued to pour in, and none of them were good. Convoys destroyed, elite troops humiliated, communication relays sabotaged, drones hijacked, and even an entire artillery battery captured when its operators fled after being swarmed by birds startled from the trees. The Empire's mighty reputation was unraveling in real time. General Krozik slammed his claws on the table and shouted that this was no longer a war but a circus. General Vorth snapped back that it was only a circus because Krozik's soldiers kept falling for the same tricks. Threx, the oldest and most temperamental of the generals, demanded orbital bombardment to level the forests entirely. Others argued that doing so would damage the planet's valuable resources, which was the entire point of conquering it in the first place. The room descended into chaos as alien officers tried to outshout one another over strategy, pride, and accusations of incompetence. Amid the shouting, a young intelligence officer tried to report new developments. His voice cracked as he explained that scouts had identified at least 3 major human resistance groups operating in the forests, one led by the woman known as Captain Mira Vega. He warned that the humans were coordinating attacks across dozens of miles, suggesting an intelligence network far beyond what the Empire had assumed. The generals ignored him until he blurted out that several alien squads had been found strung up in trees again, some painted with bright colors by laughing villagers before rescue crews arrived. The room went quiet for several seconds before erupting into even louder shouting than before. Far from the command center, in the dripping green darkness of the forests, Mira crouched beside a captured alien radio set, listening to the chaos she had caused. Her fighters moved like shadows around her, cleaning weapons, tending wounds, and repairing equipment scavenged from the last ambush. The forest smelled of rain, smoke, and victory. Lieutenant Dax Carter appeared out of the trees carrying an armful of alien ration packs with a triumphant grin. He tossed one to Mira and joked that at least the invaders were feeding them well. But beneath the humor, Mira felt the weight of what was coming. The aliens would adapt sooner or later. They had resources, technology, and a capacity for brutality far beyond anything humanity could match. She could feel the pressure tightening like a noose with each victory. The more the resistance embarrassed the Empire, the harder the Empire would hit back when it finally stopped underestimating them. That moment came sooner than expected. By mid-afternoon, scouts reported unusual movements among alien patrols. No longer marching in long, vulnerable convoys, they moved in tight formations with overlapping fields of fire. Drones scanned the treetops before troops advanced. Mechs carried flamethrowers to burn away undergrowth. It was a different kind of army now, slower but cautious, learning from its mistakes. When the first human ambush team tried to spring a trap near the river, they found themselves under a blistering crossfire that forced them to retreat with heavy casualties. 2 fighters were captured alive, the first prisoners the Empire had taken since the humiliations began. Mira heard the news in grim silence as the survivors limped back into camp. She studied the wounded men, their faces pale beneath mud and blood, and knew the war had just shifted into a far deadlier phase. Dax muttered that the aliens had finally decided to take them seriously. Mira replied that seriousness was fine, fear was better. They needed to find a way to keep the Empire off balance before it crushed them with sheer force. Night fell over the forest as rain slowed to a cold drizzle. Mira gathered her lieutenants around the fire to plan their next moves. Scouts reported that the captured fighters had been taken to a temporary command post deep inside the forest, where alien officers coordinated the new counteroffensive. Dax suggested rescuing them, but Mira shook her head. The prisoners were important, but the command post was even more important. If they could hit it hard enough, maybe the Empire would hesitate again, buying time for the resistance to regroup. The plan took shape in the firelight, risky and desperate. Half the fighters would stage a diversionary attack against an approaching alien column, while the rest struck the command post from 2 sides. Dax pointed out that the post was heavily guarded, with watchtowers, energy shields, and armored mechs. Mira reminded him that so was the last convoy they destroyed. But even as they planned, the forest itself seemed to whisper unease. Something about the alien movements felt wrong. The patrols were too predictable, the guards too obvious, as if they wanted the humans to see them. Mira wondered if they were walking into a trap. The attack began at dawn under a sky the color of ash. Explosions rumbled in the distance as the diversionary team hit the alien column, drawing troops away from the command post just as planned. Mira led the main assault herself, her fighters slipping through the mist with rifles and stolen plasma grenades. They hit the outer defenses fast, cutting down sentries and breaching the energy shield with improvised explosives. For a moment it worked perfectly. Then the mechs emerged from the smoke. 3 of them, towering metal beasts bristling with guns and flamethrowers, opening fire from hidden positions the scouts had somehow missed. Resistance fighters scattered as the ground erupted around them. Mira cursed as the trap closed, alien troops pouring from concealed bunkers to encircle the attackers. The battle devolved into chaos. Humans fought through mud and fire, dragging wounded comrades toward the trees while alien officers shouted orders from the command platform. Mira cut down a trooper with captured plasma fire and grabbed a fallen radio set, yelling for the diversionary team to hit the post from the rear. Explosions tore through the camp as Dax's fighters arrived, hurling grenades and firing wildly into the confusion. By the time the resistance pulled back into the forest, the command post lay in ruins but at a terrible cost. Nearly a dozen fighters were dead, and 2 more captured alive as the aliens tightened security across the entire region. For the first time since the invasion began, the resistance had won a victory that felt like a defeat. Mira sat in the rain afterwards staring at the smoking wreckage through binoculars. The prisoners were loaded onto transports heading toward the alien main base, where no rescue would be possible. Dax crouched beside her, mud streaked across his face, and said nothing for a long time. Finally he muttered that the Empire was bleeding, yes, but so were they. Mira knew he was right. They were running out of fighters, out of weapons, out of time. Unless they found a way to break the aliens completely, the Empire would crush them sooner or later. And somewhere in the forest, hidden among roots and shadows, something else was happening. Strange readings were coming from alien sensors near the deepest parts of the wilderness, places even the resistance avoided. Officers whispered about malfunctions in their neural command links whenever they entered certain areas, about soldiers hearing voices in the wind or seeing shapes moving through the trees that were not human. The alien generals gathered in the command center again, this time with the tight, rigid posture of officers trying to hide just how badly things were unraveling. The images on the holographic screens were supposed to show victory, but instead they displayed wrecked convoys, dead mechs, and soldiers retreating through forests choked with smoke. Commander Exorthak, recently freed from his humiliating capture in the treetops, stood in the center of the room with his armor polished to hide the dents. His voice dripped venom as he vowed to crush the humans personally. The other generals approved the plan with sharp nods. Operation Iron Sweep, they called it, the largest single offensive since the invasion began. It would drive the human resistance out of the forests once and for all. By evening the skies above the wilderness roared with the engines of landing craft. Thousands of alien soldiers poured into the dripping trees armed with flamethrowers, heavy mechs, and shield drones. The forest shook with the weight of war machines cutting paths through the undergrowth. Supply convoys followed with precise coordination. Aerial drones scanned the canopy while artillery positioned itself on the ridges to pound suspected human camps. The aliens came with fire and thunder this time, cautious but confident, determined to crush their enemy with overwhelming force. Mira Vega watched it all from a ridge overlooking the valley where the aliens advanced like a silver tide through the rain. Her fighters crouched beside her, silent as shadows among the dripping leaves. Lieutenant Dax Carter leaned on his rifle, studying the columns of enemy troops moving below. He muttered that it looked like half the Empire was marching into the forest tonight. Mira replied that this was good. The bigger the army, the bigger the disaster when it fell apart. The plan forming in her mind was reckless even by her standards. The alien soldiers were adapting to ambushes and traps, but they still relied on neural command links connecting entire units through a shared network. Scouts had reported strange malfunctions whenever alien troops moved deep into certain parts of the forest, as if the trees themselves disrupted the signals. Soldiers reported hearing phantom voices in the static, seeing lights where no lights should be, firing on shadows that turned out to be their own men. If they could lure the Empire's entire army into that place, maybe the forest itself would fight on their side. Night fell as the human fighters moved through rain and mud to set the bait. Small teams attacked alien convoys along the outer perimeter, hitting and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Others cut supply lines, set fires, and spread false radio signals, drawing troops deeper into the wilderness. The aliens advanced in frustration, determined to corner the resistance once and for all. Commander Exorthak himself led the central column, his massive exosuit bristling with weapons, his voice echoing through the neural link as he ordered his soldiers forward. The deeper they went, the worse things became. Drones lost contact with command. Artillery crews reported ghost signals jamming their targeting systems. Marching soldiers swore the trees themselves were moving when no wind blew. By midnight, entire units were navigating by helmet lights alone after comms went down across the valley. Then the forest attacked. Explosions ripped through the undergrowth as the humans struck from every side at once. Tripwires detonated charges that sent trees crashing onto the trails. Fires roared through the brush, filling the air with smoke that blinded thermal scanners. Alien soldiers fired wildly into the dark as figures moved among the trees faster than scanners could track. The neural command links flickered with static until entire squads fought without orders, separated and confused, some shooting at each other when phantom voices tricked their comms into giving false coordinates. Commander Exorthak tried to regroup his forces near a ridge where mechs laid down suppressing fire, but the machines suddenly turned their guns on one another as their targeting systems malfunctioned in the haze. One staggered backward into a pit filled with sharpened logs left by human fighters, crashing down in sparks and twisted metal. Others fired blindly at shadows until the ridge itself collapsed under demolition charges buried hours earlier. Mira watched through binoculars from the trees as the largest army the Empire had ever sent to Earth dissolved into chaos below. Soldiers stumbled through mud and smoke, weapons jamming from water and debris, commanders shouting conflicting orders as the neural link sputtered with static. Fires lit the sky red while mechs crashed through trees chasing enemies that melted into darkness before striking again from another direction. The resistance fighters fought like wraiths, appearing and vanishing, cutting down patrols before slipping away into the rain. Entire companies of alien soldiers found themselves surrounded by explosions, swinging logs, and collapsing bridges rigged with vines and pulleys. In one clearing, a squad was swarmed by a flock of birds startled from the treetops, their panicked gunfire drawing even more confusion when ricochets took down their own men. By dawn, the valley was a graveyard of shattered machines and abandoned equipment. Alien survivors fled toward the outer lines while resistance fighters melted back into the forest carrying captured weapons and supplies. Commander Exorthak himself barely escaped after his exosuit collapsed in the mud when its power core overloaded. His fury echoed across the neural link as he demanded reinforcements that never came because the entire communication network across the sector had collapsed hours earlier. Back at the alien command center, the generals watched the disaster unfold with expressions of stunned disbelief. Operation Iron Sweep had ended not in victory but humiliation on a scale no one could explain. Dozens of mechs destroyed, hundreds of soldiers dead or missing, entire divisions routed by enemies armed with little more than explosives, ropes, and weather. General Threx demanded orbital strikes to burn the forests to ash. General Vorth argued that their soldiers would mutiny if ordered into another assault after what had just happened. Krozik insisted that someone inside the command staff must be leaking information to the resistance because no primitive species could possibly outsmart the Empire's finest officers so completely. Accusations flew across the room until officers nearly came to blows while the holographic map flashed red with losses too severe to hide from the rest of the fleet. Far from the chaos of the command center, Mira stood on a rain-slick ridge watching smoke rise through the treetops where the Empire's army had shattered itself against mud, fire, and confusion. Dax joined her with a battered alien rifle slung across his back, grinning despite the exhaustion etched into his face. He said the Empire would come back harder after this. Mira nodded, her eyes on the horizon where the enemy retreated toward its bases. They would come back. They always did. But something had changed tonight. The Empire's soldiers no longer marched like conquerors. They moved like men who feared the trees themselves. Smoke still drifted through the forest hours after the battle as rain fell in steady curtains, washing mud and ash into the ravines. The resistance fighters moved among the wreckage gathering supplies from shattered mechs and abandoned alien packs. Mira Vega watched silently as villagers came out of hiding to help carry food and medicine from the captured convoys. Children darted between the ruins laughing at the sight of alien helmets mounted on sticks like trophies. Yet even as victory echoed through the drenched wilderness, Mira felt unease knotting her stomach. The Empire had taken a beating, but it would recover. It always did. Pride and fear made dangerous enemies, and the Trilari Empire had both in abundance. While the humans celebrated, the alien command center descended into open fury. General Threx pounded the table with a fist like a hammer as casualty reports poured in from every sector. Krozik accused the intelligence division of incompetence while Vorth claimed the entire operation had been sabotaged from within. Someone leaked plans, he insisted, because there was no way the humans could predict troop movements so perfectly otherwise. Officers shouted until their voices cracked while Commander Exorthax stood in the center silent and trembling with rage. His reputation lay in ruins after 2 humiliations in the same cursed forest. He finally spoke only once to vow that the human leader responsible for this chaos would be captured alive and executed publicly before the entire empire. But even as the generals screamed at one another, alien soldiers whispered in private about what they had seen. Entire platoons swore the forest itself attacked them, that machines turned against their own operators, that calms filled with phantom voices giving false orders. One squad claimed to have seen glowing shapes moving through the trees beyond scanner range. Another swore something massive uprooted a mech before vanishing into the storm. The Empire dismissed it all as battle fatigue, but the soldiers marched with unease now, eyes on the trees as though they expected the branches themselves to reach for them. Back in the human camp, Mira met with Lieutenant Dax and the other resistance leaders around a fire burning low against the rain. Scouts brought word of an alien defector captured during the chaos. At first Mira suspected a trick until the figure stepped from the shadows with wrists raised and weapons discarded. He was tall even for a Trilari soldier, but his armor bore no rank markings and his face carried exhaustion rather than arrogance. Through a translator he introduced himself as Varric, formerly of the Alien Communications Corps, and requested to speak with Mira alone. She studied him carefully while rain dripped from the edges of the tent. Many of her fighters wanted him executed immediately rather than risk betrayal, but something in his posture suggested desperation rather than deception. Mira finally ordered everyone out except Dax, who stayed close with a rifle across his knees. Varric explained in halting words that he had deserted after witnessing the Empire slaughter civilians during early stages of the invasion on other worlds. Here on Earth he had seen not only brutality but incompetence from generals who treated soldiers like disposable parts in a machine. He claimed many low-ranking troops were questioning the war after the repeated humiliations inflicted by human resistance. Some whispered of mutiny, though fear kept them silent. More importantly, Varric revealed a secret the Empire had buried deep. The Trilari Neural Command network linking entire armies relied on resonance signals broadcast from orbiting control ships. Those signals became unstable when exposed to irregular electromagnetic interference, the kind created accidentally by certain dense organic environments. The sprawling forests of Earth disrupted the network more than any battlefield in the Empire's history, turning precision coordination into chaos whenever armies marched too deep beneath the canopy. The generals refused to admit it, blaming sabotage rather than concede that mud, rain, and trees could cripple their technology. Mira realized with a slow grin that the resistance had stumbled into its greatest weapon by accident. Their traps and ambushes worked not only because of clever planning but because the Empire's own systems fell apart inside the wilderness. Every burning convoy, every panicked retreat, every mech firing on its own troops came from the Empire's blind insistence on fighting a kind of war its machines could not control. Varric offered more than information. He claimed to have access codes for one of the orbital relay stations transmitting the neural link across the continent. If the Resistance could strike that station, the entire network might collapse permanently, leaving every alien unit deaf and blind on the ground. It would trigger chaos far beyond the forests, and maybe even spark open rebellion among soldiers already questioning their leaders. Dax listened with narrowed eyes before asking why an alien officer would betray his own empire so completely. Varric's voice turned bitter as he spoke of comrades abandoned to die when generals refused rescue missions for fear of losing equipment, of civilians executed for sport, of soldiers whipped for retreating from battles lost before they began. He said the Empire had rotted from arrogance long before humanity ever fought back. Mira believed him because she had seen the same arrogance burn cities across Earth. That night under dripping trees the Resistance leaders argued over the plan. Some feared a trap, others doubted they had the strength left for such an attack. But Mira knew the Empire would eventually bring heavier weapons, maybe even orbital strikes, once pride outweighed the need for resources. They had one chance to break the invaders before that happened. While the humans prepared, unrest spread quietly through alien ranks. Soldiers muttered about endless campaigns fought under officers who hid in armored carriers while infantry died in the mud. Entire companies requested reassignment to other worlds rather than march into the cursed forests again. Commanders crushed dissent brutally, but whispers carried faster than discipline. Stories of glowing figures in the trees grew with every telling until some soldiers claimed Earth itself resisted conquest. In the command center the generals tightened control with threats and executions while blaming one another for failure. Commander Exorthak demanded another massive offensive to restore discipline through victory. General Vorth argued for caution until orbital control ships confirmed secure communications. Threx pushed again for planetary bombardment, though even he admitted rebellion among ground troops might spread if soldiers were ordered to march once more into forests that swallowed entire battalions. Mira watched all this unfold through intercepted transmissions with a sense that the war balanced on a knife's edge. The Empire was bleeding pride, soldiers, and control while humanity gained weapons, allies, and the advantage of chaos. Yet the final blow remained to be struck. Rain hammered the earth in unending sheets as the Resistance gathered for what everyone knew would be the final gamble. Mira Vega stood beneath the dripping canopy studying the crude map lit by a single lantern. The alien orbital relay station sat on a plateau of rock and metal miles beyond the forest edge, surrounded by walls bristling with guns and patrolled by mechs large enough to crush tanks underfoot. The Empire believed it unassailable. That was fine with Mira. They had believed the same thing about every convoy, outpost, and army shattered in these same forests. Now humanity would strike straight at the heart of the invaders' command network, or die trying. Lieutenant Dax Carter crouched beside her, soaked to the skin like everyone else, eyes scanning the map with tight focus. He said the approach through the canyons would be suicide. Mira agreed but pointed out it was only suicide if they failed. The stolen access codes from Varric would overload the relay if they reached the main control hub. Without the neural link, the Empire's armies would fall into confusion across half the planet. This was bigger than forests or villages now. One blow could cripple the entire occupation. Varric himself waited nearby in silence, armored but unarmed, the weight of betrayal heavy across his alien features. He had given them everything: routes, codes, shift schedules, power frequencies. Some fighters still wanted him dead on principle alone, but Mira trusted him because she had to. Without his knowledge, this plan was nothing but desperation and rain. They moved at dusk in small teams, slipping through the trees toward the canyon beyond which the relay loomed like a black spear against the clouds. The Empire had fortified the approaches with bunkers, drones, and walls of sensors, but the humans had learned the rhythms of alien patrols through months of guerrilla warfare. They struck silently at the outer guards using knives and suppressed rifles, leaving bodies in the mud while the storm masked every sound. As they advanced, Mira could feel the tension like wire drawn tight. Every fighter knew there would be no reinforcements, no retreat, no second chances. The Empire would throw everything it had into protecting the relay once the alarm sounded. They had to reach the control hub before that happened. The first alarms came sooner than expected. A drone spotted one of the diversionary teams crossing a ridge, and the night exploded with sirens and gunfire. Floodlights cut through rain as alien troops poured from the bunkers in disciplined lines. Resistance fighters opened fire from the cliffs above, buying time as Mira led the main assault team straight toward the outer walls under a storm of plasma bolts. Explosions ripped craters through mud and stone while Mech stalked through the firelight like steel monsters. Varric sprinted beside Mira carrying the device that would destroy the neural network. Dax covered them with a captured plasma rifle, shouting orders over the chaos as fighters planted explosives along the walls. One charge detonated beneath a gate in a blast of mud and fire. The humans surged through the gap before defenders could regroup, fighting room by room through the outbuildings toward the main tower where the control hub pulsed with blue light. Inside the compound, the battle turned into chaos. Alien officers screamed orders through flickering comms while soldiers fought in corridors filled with smoke and shrapnel. Resistance fighters used stolen grenades and improvised firebombs to clear bunkers one after another. Mira led from the front, kicking open doors and cutting down guards as they climbed the tower stairs 3 at a time. Varric guided them through blast doors using access codes until they reached the control hub at the tower's heart. The hub was a cavern of humming machines and glowing conduits feeding power upward to the orbital relay above the clouds. Alien technicians scattered when the fighters burst in. Dax and his team sealed the doors while Mira and Varric crossed the chamber to the central console. Alarms howled through the base as enemy reinforcements converged from every side. The device had to be connected manually, Varric shouted over the noise, and once activated the overload would cascade through the entire network in seconds. Mira slammed the device into the console as the doors shuddered under explosions outside. Varric's claws flew across the interface entering codes faster than human eyes could follow. The hub lights flickered red as systems screamed warnings in alien script. Dax shouted that Mech were breaching the lower levels and they had maybe 2 minutes before the entire tower swarmed with enemy troops. The overload sequence began with a rising whine that drilled through bone and steel alike. Across the continent, every alien helmet, mech, and drone linked to the neural network suddenly filled with static. Command signals collapsed into gibberish. Entire battalions froze mid-march as orders vanished into white noise. Some units received phantom commands sending them in circles or firing on empty forests. Others shut down completely as power surges fried circuits. In the relay tower, enemy soldiers burst through the doors just as the final sequence completed. Plasma fire chewed through walls while Mira's fighters held the line long enough for Varric to smash the console, ensuring the system could never be restored. A blast threw Dax across the floor, but he rolled to his feet firing until the last magazine clicked empty. Mira ordered retreat through the smoke as enemy fire turned the chamber into an inferno. Fighters fell one by one, covering the withdrawal down shattered stairwells while alarms wailed above the thunder of battle. Outside the compound, alien forces fought in confusion without coordination, some units retreating while others advanced blindly into ambushes set by human reinforcements arriving from the forests. By dawn, the relay tower burned like a torch against the gray sky. The neural command network lay in ruins. Alien divisions cut off from orders surrendered or fled into wilderness, now crawling with resistance fighters and armed villagers. Some alien soldiers mutinied outright, turning on officers who demanded suicidal assaults without communications or support. The Empire's once flawless machine of conquest collapsed into chaos in less than a day. Mira watched it all from a ridge beyond the smoking compound, exhausted and mud-soaked, her rifle empty, her uniform scorched. Dax limped to her side, grinning through blood and rain as news spread of entire cities rising against the occupiers now cut off from command. Varric stood apart in silence, watching the Empire he had once served tear itself apart below. By nightfall, the surviving generals abandoned the planet entirely, retreating to orbit with what forces they could rally while human militias swept through remaining outposts. Commander Exorthak died when his own troops refused to follow orders and left him behind during the retreat. The Trilari Empire had not been defeated by greater weapons or larger armies but by mud, forests, chaos, and the stubborn refusal of humans to fight the way wars were supposed to be fought.